Welcome. We're looking today at something, well, absolutely essential for getting around in the digital world. How we prove who we are online.
Right, when accessing accounts and systems.
Exactly. And the old ways. They just aren't cutting it anymore against, modern threats.
They really aren't.
We've been looking through some material provided to us specifically, a guide that focuses on multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, and our goal here is pretty clear to really get a handle on what multi-factor authentication, or MFA, actually is, why it's become so critical now, not just, a nice to have, and perhaps most practically walk through what this guide tells us about putting it into action.
So, sort of pulling out the core information for you.
Precisely, making it accessible and clear.
And that challenge you mentioned, it's laid out pretty starkly in the material. Just relying on passwords alone,
Yes.
it's simply not enough anymore.
Not even close.
The guide highlights that credential issues are this massive vulnerability. I mean, think about this number they quote. These issues contribute to a huge 81% of hacking-related corporate data breaches.
81%.
Yeah, that statistic. Well, it just makes it undeniable that we need a completely different approach.
It is quite striking, isn't it, how vulnerable password-only access is when you break it down. It rests entirely on just one type of proof. Something you know.
Just that one thing.
That single layer, all by itself, just doesn't offer enough protection against determined attackers today.
And the guide goes into detail on exactly how that single layer gets bypassed. It lists the usual suspects, the attacks we hear about all the time.
Like phishing.
Right? Phishing emails designed to trick you into giving up your password.
Hmm.
Then there are brute force attacks, where software just guesses and guesses combinations.
Hammering away.
And credential stuff, that one's particularly nasty, where attackers use passwords stolen from one breach to try logging into other sites.
Because people reuse passwords.
Exactly. And then there's malware, like keyloggers, that just sit there recording everything you type.
And we can't forget the human side of things, which the guide also touches on.
Okay, wait.
People choosing weak, easy-to-guess passwords. Or, like you said, reusing that same password across loads of different services.
Or even just writing it down somewhere insecure.
Yeah. It's this mix of external threats and, frankly, our own habits that makes that single password layer so fragile.
And when a password is compromised, the consequences spelled out in the material are pretty severe.
It can be devastating.
We're talking significant data breaches, direct financial losses, reputational damage that can take years to fix, and potentially hefty regulatory fines too. As the attackers get more sophisticated, more automated, that single point of failure is just, well, it's completely inadequate for protecting anything valuable.
So if passwords alone are failing us, what's the answer? This is where multi-factor authentication, MFA, comes in. It's basically a security method that demands more than one piece of evidence to prove it's really you. And crucially, these pieces of evidence have to come from different categories of credentials.
Different types of proof.
Exactly. And the whole idea is building a layered defense. If an attacker somehow gets past one layer, say, they steal your password, they still hit other different kinds of barriers, it makes getting in without authorization significantly harder.
Right. And the guide clears up something that sometimes trips people up. The difference between MFA and two-factor authentication, 2FA.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It points out that 2FA is actually a specific type of MFA. It means using exactly two factors.
Two, and only two.
Whereas terms like two-step authentication or just MFA are broader. They can be two or more factors.
But the key takeaway is, moving beyond just a password, whether it's to two factors or three or more, that's a massive improvement in security.
A huge leap.
Definitely. A single password is just one factor, something you know. 2FA means you need two, like maybe something you know and something you physically have. MFA could mean two, or it could mean more. Maybe adding something you are, like a fingerprint, or even bringing in contextual information about the login itself.
Yeah.
It's all about having multiple checks that are independent of one another.
Okay, so the guide breaks these independent checks down into four main categories of authentication factors. This is where you see that layered approach really taking shape.
And what's interesting about these categories is how each one offers a distinct way to verify identity. They add different kinds of resistance.
So first up are the something you know factors. These are the ones we're all familiar with, right?
The classics.
Your password, a peon number, maybe those security questions like, what street did you grow up on?
Yeah, those.
The guide points out these are common, sure, but also the most vulnerable to the attacks we just talked about. Phishing, guessing, finding info online.
Right. Which is why the guide really hammers home that they have to be combined with other types of factors. They just aren't strong enough by themselves.
Definitely not a standalone solution.
No way. They're often a starting point, but totally inadequate alone. Okay, next category. Something you have. These are possession factors.
So proving it's you because you physically possess something.
Exactly. The guide mentions examples like those little hardware tokens that generate a new code every 60 seconds or so.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Or smart cards that need a reader. But probably the most common one now is your mobile phone.
Right.
This could be getting a one-time code sent via SMS text message, though the guide does mention risks there, like SIM swapping.
That's a worry.
Or perhaps more securely, using a dedicated authenticator app on your phone that generates those rotating codes. The security here depends on you keeping that item safe, but it adds a really significant barrier that has nothing to do with whether someone guessed your password.
Okay, makes sense. Then there's something you are, the biometric factors.
This is where it gets personal.
Yeah, using unique biological characteristics. Fingerprints, facial recognition, maybe voice patterns, even iris or retina scans.
Pretty sophisticated stuff.
The guide notes these are often seen as highly secure because they're intrinsically tied to you. Very hard to copy or steal like a password or even a token.
True. Though they do need specific hardware like fingerprint readers or cameras.
And the guide does acknowledge some users might have privacy concerns about handing over biometric data. But the tech is getting better and offers, both security and convenience.
It definitely does. Okay, finally, the guide talks about location and contextual factors. These work a bit differently.
Also,
They aren't usually standalone methods where you actively provide something. Instead, the system uses information about the login attempt itself to figure out the risk level. This is often part of what's called adaptive MFA.
okay. So it looks at things like where I'm logging in from.
Exactly. Your geographical location, the IP address you're using, maybe the time of day, the type of devices at your usual laptop or a new phone.
So it's analyzing the whole situation around the login attempt.
Precisely. If you typically log in from your office on your work computer during work hours, that looks normal, low risk. But if suddenly a login attempt comes from halfway across the world at 3 a.m. on a device the system's never seen before, even if the password is correct, the context screams unusual.
And that triggers more checks.
That's the idea, yes. As the guide explains, that unusual context can prompt the system to demand extra verification. Maybe it asks for a code from your authenticator app, plus a fingerprint scan, for instance.
Even if the password was right initially.
Correct. But conversely, if the context looks totally normal and low risk, the system might let you log in quicker, maybe without asking for that second factor every single time.
So it adapts the security level based on the real-time risk.
Exactly. It's an intelligent, risk-based approach. It aims to balance strong security with not annoying the user too much when everything looks safe.
Seeing how these different factors actually work together in everyday situations is useful. The guide gives some good practical examples of where MFA is commonly used.
Yeah, like online banking. That's a classic one.
Right? You put in your password, that's something you know. And then the bank usually sends a code to your phone. That's something you have.
Or think about logging into work resources. The guide mentions scenarios where you might need your network password, maybe a code from an app on your phone,
Possession.
and perhaps even a fingerprint scan on your work laptop. Something you are.
Before you get full access. Multiple layers right there.
Cloud admin accounts are another big one the guide highlights. Makes sense, given how much power those accounts have.
Absolutely critical there.
And we're seeing it more and more on shopping websites, too, often using 2FA. It gives that extra bit of confidence that it's really you making a purchase, helps prevent fraud if your password got leaked somewhere else.
Yeah, these examples really show how those different MFA layers function across various scenarios to protect access.
So, okay, we understand the need for better security than just passwords. But why specifically are organizations pushing for MFA now? The guide outlines several key advantages.
Right, there are some really compelling reasons driving adoption. Let's break those down. First off, it provides significantly stronger access control.
That's the core benefit, really.
By making users provide multiple distinct proofs of identity from those different categories we talked about, the guide explains it just creates a much tougher barrier.
Each factor is like a separate gate, isn't it?
Exactly. An attacker might somehow get your password, but they still need to figure out how to get past the token requirement or the biometric scan or fool the contextual analysis. It dramatically shrinks the attack surface compared to just needing one password.
And tied directly to that is the reduced risk of breaches. The guide is really clear on this.
I'll go.
MFA directly counters attacks that start with stolen or guessed login details. Even if attackers get their hands on a big list of usernames and passwords, maybe from a breach at some other company.
Which happens all the time.
All the time.
Oh.
They're still highly unlikely to also have the required second or third factors for your specific accounts. This fundamentally lowers the odds of them successfully breaking into your systems.
Which means protecting sensitive data, avoiding financial loss, saving your reputation.
All of that. It's huge.
It's also become pretty much essential for how we work now, right? The guide emphasizes its role in enhanced remote access.
Oh, absolutely. With so many people, employees, contractors, partners connecting from outside the traditional office.
Logging into VPNs, cloud apps.
You absolutely need strong authentication for those connections. MFA provides that rigorous identity check, making remote work feasible without opening massive security holes.
And this whole approach fits neatly into modern security thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The guide mentions how MFA supports zero-trust principles.
Yes, it's fundamental to zero trust. The basic idea of zero trust is never trust, always verify.
Right. Don't assume someone is safe just because they're inside the network or logged in once.
Exactly. Every single access request needs to be authenticated and authorized. MFA provides that crucial, strong identity verification step that's needed before any access is granted. Adaptive MFA especially aligns perfectly with this continuous verification idea.
Then there are the sort of external drivers. The guide mentions meeting compliance and insurance needs.
Yeah, that's a big motivator for many organizations. Lots of industry rules and data privacy laws.
Like IPA for healthcare, PCI DSS for credit cards, GDPR in Europe.
They either require or strongly recommend robust authentication, like MFA. So putting MFA in place helps companies tick those compliance boxes.
And it can impact cyber insurance, too.
Definitely. Insurers increasingly expect to see MFA implemented. Having it can be a requirement for getting coverage, or it might lead to better terms because it shows you're taking security seriously.
Okay, and one last advantage you touched on earlier, the guide brings up how adaptive MFA helps with balancing security and user experience.
Right, because a common worry is that adding security layers makes things too annoying for users.
Logins taking forever, too many steps.
But adaptive MFA tackles that directly. It adjusts the required authentication based on the risk it detects. Low risk, everyday logins might be quick and easy.
Fewer hoops to jump through.
Exactly. But high-risk actions, like trying to access super-sensitive data or logging in from a totally new place, will trigger those extra stricter checks. It optimizes security where needed without causing unnecessary hassle for routine stuff.
Makes sense. So implementing MFA isn't just flicking a switch then. It needs proper planning and rollout. The guide lays out some practical steps for organizations.
Yeah, it's a process. It really starts with assessment and planning.
Looking before you lead.
Pretty much. You need to take stock of your current security, figure out where your risks are, who needs access to what sensitive stuff, what are the likely threats.
So you know where MFA is most critical.
Exactly. And it helps you decide what level of security is needed for different systems and which MFA types make sense for different groups of users, considering their roles and maybe their tech savviness.
After the assessment, it's about choosing the methods.
Right. The guide suggests matching the MFA methods to the risk level of the resource and making sure it's practical for the users.
So maybe super sensitive systems get a mixed password, token, and biometrics.
Could be. While general access might just need a password plus a mobile authenticator app, you have to weigh things like cost, how easy it is to set up and manage, how easy it is for users, and if it works with your existing tech.
And then integration is key. The guide really stresses this.
Yeah, you need MFA to work across your whole IT environment.
Not just in isolated pockets.
No. It needs to connect with your VPNs, your single sign-on systems.
SSO, right. Log in once for multiple apps.
Yes. And your cloud apps, your main identity and access management or IAM systems, the platforms that manage who everyone is and what they can do, getting that consistent security across all the ways people access things is crucial, especially if you're aiming for that zero trust model.
So getting the system set up is one thing, but keeping it effective long-term is another challenge, right? The guide offers best practices here, too.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing effort. User education comes up again as vital.
Training the users.
You have to. The guide emphasizes that users need to understand why MFA is being used, what risks it prevents. They need to know how to use their specific MFA method properly and securely.
And crucially, how to spot and report phishing attempts, trying to trick them out of their MFA codes or approvals.
Exactly. If you address their concerns and show the benefits, you get much better buy-in.
And MFA doesn't mean you can forget about passwords, does it?
Not at all. The guide is clear. Combine MFA with strong passwords. MFA adds layers on top of a good password. It doesn't replace the need for one.
So still need complex, unique passwords for that something you know part.
Definitely. That makes the first layer harder to crack, and then MFA provides the backup. Even if the password is compromised, MFA should still block the access attempt.
Okay. What else? Monitoring.
Yes, continuous vigilance through monitoring and review. The guide recommends keeping an eye on authentication activity. Look for weird stuff.
Like lots of failed logins. Or logins from strange places.
Or attempts to register new MFA devices unexpectedly. Regularly checking those logs helps you spot potential attacks quickly and shut them down.
And since threats change, the guide suggests regular assessments of the whole MFA setup.
Right. You need to periodically check if your configuration and policies are still up to scratch against the latest threats and how your business operates. Maybe tweak your adaptive MFA rules based on new intelligence.
Keep it current.
Keep it current. And finally, plan for the future.
How so?
Design your MFA system thinking about growth and future threats. Choose solutions that can scale up, add more users, more apps, maybe new types of authentication as they emerge. Staying informed about new tech and new attack methods is key to maintaining strong protection over time.
So pulling all this together, the main message from the guide seems pretty clear. Multi-factor authentication isn't really optional anymore, is it?
No, it's become a fundamental piece of any solid security strategy. It's about strategically layering your defenses to guard information and manage who gets into your critical systems.
And getting this right takes real focus. The guide does mention that specialist help is available, pointing to entities like Turnkey Technologies that assist organizations with implementation and security assessments.
Yeah, getting expert help can make a big difference in doing it effectively.
So, maybe a final thought for you based on all this. Step back from work for a second and think about your own personal digital life. How many layers of identity verification do you actually use for your most sensitive online accounts? Your bank, your main email, maybe important social media.
Good question.
How many distinct layers are truly protecting those accounts? Is there maybe more you could explore there to make your own online world a bit more secure?
That's definitely something worth reflecting on for all of us using online services today.
Well, thanks for spending this time exploring this really important topic with us.